We are still on USA. We are still on our topic on depth studies, USA specifically. From 1919, USA from 1919 to 1941, we have been looking at the economic boom, and we are still continuing with the boom or the economic boom in the 1920s in America. We looked at some of the problems that the farmers encountered, and today we are looking at the problems in the traditional industries in America. Why or what were the challenges that faced the traditional industries in America during the economic boom period? Number one, which were these problems in the traditional industries, or which were these industries also that did not enjoy, did not benefit or profit from the prosperity that was experienced in America in the 1920s. We see that workers in many of the older industries or in the traditional industries were not equally as happy. It was not only the farmers, but also workers who were in the traditional industries. Some of these industries include the coal mining industry. Coal mining used to be one of the biggest employers. It used to be one of the biggest employers in America. But at some stage, the coal mining industry began to experience some struggles or some challenges, just like the farming industry. The coal mining industry was losing out to new power sources such as electricity and oil. The coal mining industry had problems or had stiff competition to new power sources like electricity and oil, which manufacturers preferred to use. The manufacturers turned to electricity, and when this happened, or when the manufacturers switched to electricity and oil, the coal mining industry suffered. The workers some of them lost their jobs. Their wages also declined because the profits also went low. However, the coal mining industry also had overproduced coal. There was overproduction of coal, just like in the agricultural industry or farming industry. The farmers had also overproduced goods, and with the overproduction of coal, this also brought challenges to the coal mining industry, as it was very hard to get market for their products. The skilled workers who were in some of these traditional industries, they had to compete against the innovations and use of machines, and there was also cheap labor. Remember, this was the time when there were immigrants who were moving, or there was mass movement of immigrants to America. And the workers in these industries, the skilled workers, had to compete against cheap labor, mostly which was provided by the immigrants. And their wages did not increase. Their wages did not increase because of the competition and because of the challenges that the traditional industries were experiencing. Some of the characteristics that are significant during the economic boom in the US in the 1920s include the following in a summary. Number one, mass consumption of fast products. People were able to buy goods in large numbers. And number two, there was growth or dynamic business growth, and this led to prosperity in general. The boom was also encouraged. It was encouraged by the policies of the Republican Party. which was pro-business and believed in low taxes and protective tariffs. It was characteristics of the US economy boom in the 1920s, and during this same period, there was growth of new industries. There was growth of new industries, which were now using new materials. Motor cars or ownership of cars by families was also an important part, or was also an integral part of the economic boom. And the farmers and laborers were some of the categories, some of the people who did not benefit from the economic boom because of the overproduction of their goods. Their goods were sold at low prices, and this fetched low profit. And the traditional or older industries during this economic boom period, such as coal mining, faced competition from other new materials such as oil. So the traditional industries, farmers and laborers are some of the categories that did not enjoy or did not benefit from the economic prosperity in America in 1920s. The USA period, where there was economic boom, is referred to as the Roaring 20s. And USA had a number of advantages. There were a number of advantages or factors that enabled their prosperity, or that contributed to their prosperity in the 1920s. The 1920s is described as the Roaring 20s, or the era of booming 20s. There was boom almost in each and every industry. There was growth, there was prosperity, there were profits, there were goods in the market, and the president, Herbert Hoover of USA, predicted that sooner USA was going to transition from poverty to prosperity or to growth. The Roaring 20s time where everyone was it was a time where everyone was experiencing growth in some way or the other. Though we said the farmers and others like the workers in the traditional industries were not experiencing the growth that others were proud of. Let's look at some of the features of the Roaring 20s, some of the prominent features that are characteristic of the Roaring 20s in America. Number one, we have town versus country or countryside. This was the first time in American history. It was the first time in American history when more Americans shifted or moved from the countryside to the towns. In the towns, the skyscrapers buildings were prominent, and this was a powerful symbol, that is, the skyscrapers were powerful symbols throughout the 1920s. Cities grew very rapidly, or there was increased growth of cities, and there was also increased tension between the rural and the urban Americans, often the effect that the growth was having or bringing on their traditions. Number two, apart from country, town side movement of Americans from country to town and the confusion or tension in their traditions, entertainment was also another characteristic of the Roaring 20s period. Moral values changed. The entertainment industry boomed. People had more time for leisure. Average working week or hours dropped. Average wages increased by 100%. And workers had free time and also had more money to spend on the entertainment industry. Number 3, the radio. Most households in the US, the most households in the US or in America could own or owned radio sets, and those who could not afford were allowed to buy and pay on instruments. And those people who also were poor, they could not manage to own a radio. They were allowed to go and share the radio sets with their neighbors. And by the end of 1922, there were about 508 licensed radio stations in America. The other characteristic of the Roaring Twenties period in America was the jazz music. And this was as a result of the radio stations and people listening more to radios, and they got interested in music. They were able to access music, and most of the people were obsessed, or they had passion for jazz. And the African Americans particularly took advantage of this and developed their talents in dances and new styles. But all in all, this changed the behavior of people. It changed the behavior of people, and the older generations disliked the jazz music because of its negative influence on the young people. Newspapers and magazines printed articles also analyzing the influence of jazz. The other characteristic of the Roaring Twenties period in America was the sporting industry. Baseball particularly became a big money sport. And with its legendary teams like the New York Yankees and Boston Red Sox. Boxing also was popular. From time of the Roaring Twenties, boxing became a popular sporting activity as well, and with their heroes like the world heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey, and millions of Americans listened to sports events and news on the radios.